This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. Hey, what's up, and welcome to Q&A, the show where I take your questions from YouTube and Twitter and answer them here first and foremost. But before I get into the questions, I want to talk about the fact that Bill Callahan is officially leaving the Browns. Shout out to Camp Justice. She was the first one I saw with the report out that the Browns will be losing Bill Callahan. This is something that we talked about in an earlier video that I did. And if you want to know my more in-depth thoughts about if the Browns can survive without Bill Callahan, I will refer to that video because I pretty much covered it all in that one. But the Sparks Note version of what I said in that video and what I still think to be true is that I think the bulk of Bill Callahan's work was done in Cleveland, whether he stayed here or not. He had done most of his job. His projects were completed. Wyatt Teller, he's gotten as far with Jed Wills as he's ever going to get. Like DeJuan Jones might have been something he could continue to work on, but DeJuan Jones is a pretty complete product in himself. So there wasn't much left for Bill Callahan to do. So I think professionally, it makes sense that he would decide to move on because he's accomplished about as much as he could hope to accomplish here in Cleveland. And Cleveland just doesn't need him as much as his son does. So that being the fact, I think there is some comfort to be had if you're a Browns fan knowing, hey, we don't need him as much as we needed him back when Stefanski first took over. Now, is it going to be something that stinks? Sure. Losing a great coach is never fun, but I do think that this is something that the Browns are in a position to be able to handle because they have veteran leadership in that room. Joe Bitonio, Wyatt Teller, Ethan Pocic to kind of hold down that offensive line culture. So no matter who's brought in, you're still going to have that culture. And you have enough knowledge in that room that no matter who the offensive line coach is, it's going to be relatively similar to what you were doing before. I wouldn't even be surprised if the Browns decide to go in-house. They might even decide to go with something a little bit different because now that they're not going to be doing so much wide zone, the style in which they block is going to be a little bit different, which is going to require some different techniques. So maybe they get a offensive line coach in there with a little bit of a different background, which could help adjust the run game, adjust the pass game, because the Browns offense is evolving. I think this was a great point for Bill Callahan and the Cleveland Browns to just have a nice mutual split. Like, I really do. So while it's unfortunate news because we've heard how great of a hand Bill Callahan has been for the Cleveland Browns, how valuable of a resource he's been for the Cleveland Browns, I do think that the Browns are in the fortunate place to where they can let go of talent like him and still be fine because they have all of those things in that room still. And I think it was also time for Bill Callahan to move on from the Cleveland Browns. There wasn't much left for him to accomplish. And I think the Browns were at a place where they probably needed to move on and find a different way of going about things in the offensive line because they're just making that many changes. So that's my overall thoughts on it. I know you guys had questions about it, but I wanted to make sure before I even got into questions that this is addressed first because it's most certainly going to be the title of the video. My guy Greg's here with the first question today. He says, are there any DeJuan Jones like candidates who have great physical talents but for whatever reason may slip up in the later rounds for non-football reasons? I did not see any of that this week or hear of any of that. This Senior Bowl was pretty much on the up and up. Everybody showed up who was reported to show up by the first practice. Nobody really mysteriously missed any practices. There weren't anything like that, or at least anything like that to my knowledge. So I don't think there's going to be any stories like that. I think in reverse, you're getting something happening with Roger Rosengarten, where he was a 5th round prospect and he might have jumped himself up significantly depending on what his 40 time ends up being. The next question comes from CTG Cement, who says, what is your favorite aspect and experience of my trip to the Senior Bowl? I would say my favorite thing about visiting the Senior Bowl is how in depth of a look you really get at these prospects. Like, you get to get on the field and look at them at the end of practice. You get like a good look at like how big they are, how they stack up. Like, you get a real eye test for that. And you just get to watch these dudes play a ton of football. Like, they play a ton of football in those practices. Like, I've been to training camp practices for the Cleveland Browns. I've been to practices for college football teams, and they play so much football at the Senior Bowl practice, and I think that's one of the best things about it. This is the one pre-draft process thing where they're actually playing football. Everything else is nonsense that happens for the rest of this process, right? 40 times, pro days, all of this stuff. It's kind of overblown nonsense, but this is football, man. Like, if somebody's stock goes down at the Senior Bowl, outside of a DeJuan Jones situation, it's usually because of the football. And that's the beautiful thing about it. Like, the pre-draft process is just filled with nonsense. And this is the one pre-draft thing that's just about the ball. And the most beautiful thing about it is that you're there and there's so many people there that it's just about the ball, right? And you'll see like football coaches, executives there, all of that great stuff as well. But for the most part, like, we trying to watch some ball, dog. We trying to see who good at this football. And I think that's just a beautiful environment to be in. The next question comes from Rats, who says, do you think DW would like a big body wide receiver with high catch point ability like Mike Williams or a Brandon Cooks, Will Fuller type? Do mean more agile speed that might perform in deep to short situations and motions better. I hope David Njoku out wide more also. I think we misread what Deshaun's preferences are when we look at his play style. Like, because I think initially a lot of people were like, you got to get him a deep speed guy. He likes to throw deep. Deshaun Watson likes to attack downfield, but he's not throwing a bunch of go balls when he goes downfield. Like, in his Houston tape, he's throwing a lot of posts, a lot of ends, some backside digs. Like, he likes to switch it up. And I think for a dude like Deshaun, you need somebody who's comfortable not just being downfield as a wide receiver, but fighting downfield, being creative downfield. I think like a Mike Williams type, D-Hop type, when you look at Deshaun Watson and you look at the places where he won football games, a big receiver is always there. At Clemson, when he was winning, Mike Williams. At Houston, when he was winning, DeAndre Hopkins. Now, they brought in Will Fuller and they brought in Brandon Cooks, and he had more yards. But Deshaun Watson also requested a trade when those were his options. Everybody fell in love with the speed options. You want to get the speed options around Deshaun Watson because we fell in love with the 2020 version of him. But you look at the areas, not the areas, but the seasons in which he's won stuff. He has a big receiver. You know what was the catalyst of him wanting to get out of Houston? They traded DeAndre Hopkins. They didn't trade DeAndre Hopkins, and he was like, oh, yeah, that's cool. I still got Brandon Cooks. He didn't give a damn about Brandon Cooks. No offense to Brandon Cooks, but that's not the type of receiver he likes. He wants a big guy, right? A Mike Williams, a DeAndre Hopkins, a Mike Evans. He likes to throw and trust his receivers. He wants to get 50-50 balls. And when you throw a 50-50 ball to somebody who's 6'5" and can jostle and really catch a football, it's not a 50-50 ball. It's a 75-25 ball. When you throw a 50-50 ball to 5'9" Elijah Moore or Marquise Goodwin, it's a 25-70 ball in the other way. You got to adjust your wide receivers to his style. He likes to throw some 50-50 balls. He likes to trust his receivers. Well, if you want to trust your receivers, you know what helps? Guys who can attack the catch point. And if you want guys who can attach the catch point, they're usually taller. I know people love to give me like the example of the 1-5-10 guy who attacks the catch point. Well, okay, yeah, get that guy. I wanted Marvin Mims last year because he does the same thing. But usually taller guys attack the catch point, and that's what you want. You want a big physical wide receiver or somebody who plays like a big physical wide receiver because that's what he works well with. And again, just look at where he's won games. It's no mistake. It's also had that. I think people overthink it. I think people overthink wide receiver a ton too, just in general, because we fall in love with so many different metrics for wide receivers. And it's just like, can they play football and are they big enough? Because size matters at that position, man. It's not the only thing, but it does matter. It's like saying your center doesn't need to be tall. It's like, nah, man. Like Draymond can be short and play center, but not everybody else. Isaac Arndt says, after you look at the prospects, you think the Browns will continue with the best player strategy or move on with a needs-oriented strategy with the draft? I've seen a lot of pundits talking about how it needs to change, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are. In case you disagree, Q, love the work. Here's my approach to draft stuff. I think it's stupid to draft only on need. I also think it's stupid to draft exclusively to your draft board, right? Best player available. I do think that's a dumb strategy if you just unquestionably always take the best player available, because that can lead to some really stupid draft picks. There needs to be a combination of it, right? Yes, you need to factor in need, because need is also where you have opportunity on the team. For example, if the Browns drafted, like, where do we really not need a bot? If the Browns drafted a guard because they were best player available, that would be a stupid draft pick. Not because that guard wouldn't be good, but because that guard wouldn't be in a position to be any good. What I mean by this is there's no opportunity for that guard to get better, develop, and grow. There's only opportunity for that guard to sit the bench and be inactive on game day. So even if that guard is a good player, you're not going to get anything out of it. My philosophy with the draft is very simple. Draft good players. Like, if you draft a good football player, you're all good. But in order for you to draft a good football player, there needs to be an opportunity for that player to develop. A reasonable opportunity. Like DeJuan Jones was a reasonable opportunity to develop. Yes, he's playing tackle. Yes, you have two starters. But that one starter you have is always getting injured, and he happens to play the same position as DeJuan Jones. There's a reasonable opportunity for development with DeJuan Jones there. That needs to be factored in as well. Like when you draft DTR, and you don't anticipate Deshaun Watson getting hurt this year and only playing 5 games, it feels like a silly pick because there's really no opportunity for development. And now you're in a situation where you don't want him to be the backup this year. You're probably going to sign a backup, and you're going to have Deshaun Watson starting, so there's really no opportunity for development. So even if DTR turns out to be a good player, you're not really helping him become a better player with how we're using him, because we don't have a great opportunity for development. So you can't just go strict on best player available. You can't just go strict on need, right? Because if you go based on need and you draft a bad player at a position of need, that's stupid. You have players that you think that are good. You have places on the roster where you feel like you have an opportunity. And as long as those two line up, you take that player. But if one of those two things don't match up, if you have a good player, no opportunity, a lot of opportunity, no good players, then stay away from those picks. But you want to have good player, good opportunity. And good opportunity does not mean need, right? Like, I don't mean that you need there's a good opportunity for a running back. There's no need for the Browns to have a running back. There's a good opportunity for a tight end. The Browns don't have a need for a tight end, right? So I don't think it's about need as much as it's about opportunity. Like, is there somewhere on this roster that player might have a chance to contribute? Because if there's nowhere that player has a chance to contribute, then how can they develop? It's really not a good situation for them to develop in. The next question comes from OG Browns fan for life. Says, hey, what wide receiver impressed you the most since the draft class for wide receivers is deep this year? Do you think we can get a decent one in the later rounds? Wide receiver impressed me the most was Roman Wilson. Do I think there's anybody the Browns could get? Like, we really got to see how they run in the 40, because for wide receivers, that like makes or break their draft stock. So I'll have a better idea after the combine. But right now, I would say there's a lot of guys who could be in the range of the Cleveland Browns, but I couldn't specifically tell you anybody as of now because we are waiting for more testing to happen. Dead Sea Salty says, yo, Q, I hope you're enjoying the Senior Bowl. What are the Browns' plans for O-line since Bill Callahan left for Tennessee? Is there anybody just as good, if not better, available internally or externally? No, he's one of the best offensive line position coaches. Can't help but think the Browns gotten worse with this loss. Again, I don't think it's about finding anybody better than Bill Callahan. I just think it's about what you already have in the room. If you were at a state with the Cleveland Browns where your offensive line was in complete disrepair, you had nobody coming back, yes, this would be a disaster for them. But you're not in that position. You have a ton of returning veterans, a ton of continuity on this team, a ton of former all-pro level players on this team. I mean, everybody you have, 3 Pro Bowlers, 4 Pro Bowlers. I forgot that Jack Conklin is still on the roster. 4 Pro Bowlers and a soon-to-be Pro Bowler in DeJuan Jones. So you're in a good spot if you're this Browns offensive line. I think, again, I think Bill Callahan's job was done in Cleveland. And the Browns are in a great place. And Bill Callahan is ready to move on to his next opportunity, which I think is great for him. He gets to work with his son. Jack Smith says the Browns decide to stick in round 2, which seems unlikely. What position could you see us taking prospects from the Senior Bowl? And should we look in rounds 2 or 3, or if we stick with our picks? I think the Browns are going to see that matchup of opportunity and talent in the second round at offensive tackle, at wide receiver, and at those 2 positions. Maybe tight end, but I think it's going to be at offensive tackle, wide receiver, maybe interior defensive line as well, right? I think there's some guys there that will be interesting for the Browns to look at on the defensive line. But in those 3 areas, that's where I think they'll probably have the strongest temptation. It depends on what they do in free agency. They might trade their pick in free agency again. They might not. We'll see. But yeah, I think wide receiver, offensive tackle, and interior defensive line. If I were to give you a hypothesis based on everything that I know and I've looked at, I would say that wide receiver is most likely to be handled externally outside the draft. I don't think they draft another wide receiver. I think they bring in some wide receivers. So I don't think that the wide receiver is going to be the pick in the second round or the third round. I would think it's going to be edge, interior defensive line, or offensive tackle. And I'm leaning towards offensive tackle, to be honest with you, because even if Jed plays well this year, Jed will need to be replaced eventually because he's going to be expensive and he's not been the fit that you've wanted next to Deshaun Watson. I think there are other guys who are better fits. Quite frankly, I think the biggest thing with Jed Wills, He's not a bad player, but his tendency to kind of let go of the gas, right? Let his foot off the pedal is something you cannot have happen when Deshaun Watson is your quarterback and he extends plays. You just need somebody who doesn't have that. And I look at Roger Rosengarten, I'm like, wow, man, that dude never quits. Like on a play, he's never not done blocking. He is like the polar opposite of that. Some room to grow there for him as well. I don't think he steps in and he's automatically better than Jed Wills, but I do think he's good enough to give you a real good boost, be a swing tackle that first year. And then when Jed's ready to walk in free agency, I think you could feel good about a guy like him stepping up there, and that frees you up to use your first round pick on whatever you want it to when you finally get it back in 2025, right? Yeah, 2025. So that's my thoughts on that. And that's my thoughts on your questions. Appreciate you guys for asking them. You guys have a great day. Have a better night. Peace.